The liquid in Daehyun's glass didn't ripple like wine should. It caught the candlelight with a metallic shimmer, purple undertones that had no business existing in a 1982 Bordeaux. 5 seconds. That's all Naomi had to speak, to warn him, to shatter the careful silence she'd perfected over 6 years of being the beautiful stranger at her husband's table. The private dining room at Sakura Palace was designed for power. Mahogany walls absorbed secrets. Crystal chandeliers cast shadows that hid as much as they revealed. Young-soon, her mother-in-law, sat across from her with that familiar expression, the one that measured Naomi's worth in designer labels and found her lacking every time. Daehyun barely glanced her way as she reached for the glass, his attention locked on the contracts spread between the place settings. Naomi had spent 190 days being invisible, being the ornament, being suspected of wanting the throne when all she'd ever wanted was to matter to the man who shared her bed, but never her life. She lifted his own glass instead, met Young-soon's eyes, and drank. "Tell me where you're watching from." Was Naomi's sacrifice the ultimate proof of love, or her final revenge against a family that never saw her? Find out as the story unfolds. I learned to smile at the right moments during my second month as Daehyun's wife. Tilt my head just so when his business associates complimented his excellent taste. Stand 3 steps behind him at galas, close enough to photograph well, but far enough to not interfere with the geometry of power. I perfected the art of being seen without being noticed. The wedding had been spectacular. Young-soon made sure of that. She'd orchestrated every detail, from the white orchids flown in from Singapore to the guest list that read like a who's who of Korea's shadow economy. What she couldn't orchestrate was warmth. Daehyun kissed me at the altar with the same efficiency he used to sign contracts. Thorough, measured, completely devoid of feeling. I told myself it would change, that the distance was just his way of maintaining authority in front of his organization, that behind closed doors he'd soften. Bet I'd matter. 6 years later, I was still waiting. Our penthouse in Gangnam was a masterpiece of minimalist luxury. 1,600 square meters of marble and glass where every surface reflected my loneliness back at me. Daehyun spent his nights in the study, door closed, handling business I wasn't allowed to understand. I spent mine in our bedroom, handling the far more dangerous business of pretending I didn't feel myself disappearing. The truth was simpler and more brutal than anyone suspected. I hadn't married Daehyun for his power. I'd married him because for 3 months during our courtship, he'd looked at me like I was the only person in the room. He'd asked about my childhood in Atlanta, my dreams of opening an art gallery, my mother's recipe for peach cobbler. He'd made me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced. Then the ring went on my finger, and the man I'd fallen for evaporated like morning fog. Young-soon's accusations started during the engagement. Quiet at first, little comments about American women and their modern ideas about marriage. By year 2, she'd stopped being subtle. Every family dinner became an interrogation. Every gift Daehyun gave me was proof I was bleeding the family fortune. Every smile I offered was evidence of my manipulation. "She's only here for what she can take," Young-soon had told Daehyun last month. I'd been standing in the hallway, holding a tray of tea I'd prepared myself, trying to prove I could be useful. Trying to prove I belonged. Daehyun's response had been worse than agreement. He'd said nothing at all. So I'd become what they accused me of being, the ornament. The beautiful stranger who wore the right clothes, attended the right events, and asked no questions about the bloodstains that sometimes appeared on his shirts. I learned to exist in the negative space of their world, present but not participating, visible but not valued. I'd become a ghost in my own life. The wine would just make it official. Young-soon Park didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Power, she'd taught me through 6 years of cutting observations, was about control. Volume was for people who hadn't yet learned how to wound with precision. The accusations started 3 weeks after the engagement announcement. We'd been having tea in her private sitting room, all antique porcelain and silk wallpaper that probably cost more than my mother's house in Atlanta. She'd smiled at me over the rim of her cup, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "American girls are raised differently," she'd said as if commenting on the weather. "More practical about marriage. less concerned with outdated concepts like duty or family honor. I tried to defend myself then, told her I loved Daehyun, that money had never been part of the equation. She'd patted my hand with fingers that felt like ice, and said, "Of course, dear. I'm sure you believe that." By the first anniversary, the gloves had come off completely. Every piece of jewelry Daehyun gave me became evidence in Young-soon's case against my character. The diamond earrings for my birthday? She certainly knows how to extract gifts from him. The Hermes bag for Christmas? Some women collect purses, others collect bank accounts. She'd perfected the art of speaking about me as if I weren't in the room. Family dinners became performances where I was both the audience and the subject. Young-soon would lean toward Daehyun's uncle or his cousin and stage whisper observations about my expensive tastes or my convenient affection. The worst part wasn't the accusations themselves. It was watching Daehyun's face as his mother dismantled my character piece by piece. He'd look down at his plate, adjust his watch, pour more wine, anything to avoid acknowledging what was happening. His silence was its own verdict. Guilty by failure to defend. I'd tried everything to prove myself. I learned Korean until I could follow their business conversations. I studied the family history, memorized the names of every ally and enemy. I dressed conservatively, spoke softly, managed the household staff with the efficiency of a corporate CEO. I became exactly what a mafia boss's wife should be. It was never enough. To Young-soon, I would always be the outsider who'd trapped her son with beauty and calculated charm. The foreigner who couldn't possibly understand the weight of the Park family legacy. The gold digger who smiled too much and loved too little. Last month she'd said it plainly. We'd been alone in the kitchen. I'd been arranging flowers, trying to feel useful. She'd walked in, paused, and delivered her assessment with surgical precision. "You're waiting for him to die, aren't you? So you can finally have it all. The money, the power, the freedom to go back to your real life." She'd examined her perfectly manicured nails. "I've seen women like you before, Naomi. You're patient. I'll give you that. But I'm watching. And I will protect my son from you." I'd opened my mouth to respond, but what was there to say? She'd already decided who I was. They all had. The poison would be the only language they'd understand. The Bordeaux hit my tongue with a chemical bitterness that didn't belong in a $3,000 bottle of wine. Underneath the oak and dark fruit, something metallic crawled across my palate, copper and rust and something sharper like licking a battery. I swallowed anyway. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The conversation continued around me. Daehyun's uncle was explaining something about shipping routes. Young-soon was nodding, her pearl earrings catching the candlelight. The world continued spinning as if I hadn't just drunk poison meant for my husband. Then the fire started. It began in my chest, a warmth that felt almost pleasant at first, like whiskey on a cold night. But it didn't stop. The heat spread outward, crawling up my throat and down into my stomach with fingers that dug deeper with each heartbeat. My hand found the edge of the table, gripping the mahogany until my knuckles went pale. "Naomi?" Daehyun's voice reached me from somewhere far away, though he was sitting right beside me. "Are you?" I tried to answer, but my throat had closed to the width of a straw. The air I managed to pull in tasted wrong, sweet and thick, like breathing through honey. My vision started to blur at the edges, the chandelier above me fracturing into 1,000 tiny stars. The napkin in my lap was white linen, monogrammed with the restaurant's logo in silver thread. I'd been holding it without realizing, twisting it between fingers that no longer felt like my own. When I brought it to my mouth, trying to contain whatever was trying to escape my throat, it came away, stained. Purple. Not red like blood, purple with that same metallic shimmer I'd seen in the wine. Young-soon saw it. Our eyes met across the table, and for the first time in 6 years, I watched understanding replace suspicion on her face. Not concern. Not horror. Just knowledge. She knew I'd seen the poison. She knew I'd drunk it anyway. And in that moment, before the real pain started, I watched her try to calculate what that meant. The crystal water glass in front of me seemed to tilt sideways, though I knew it was me falling. My expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5, the one Daehyun had given me for our first anniversary when he'd still been trying, couldn't mask the chemical smell now rising from my skin. It smelled like laboratories and mortality, sweet and wrong. Call the doctor. Daeyoon's voice had changed pitch, climbing towards something that might have been panic if he'd allowed himself such emotions. Now. Call him now. But I was already somewhere else. Somewhere beyond the mahogany and crystal, beyond the careful architecture of power that had been my prison for 2,190 days. The purple stain on white linen was the first honest thing I'd produced in 6 years. Proof that couldn't be argued with, or reinterpreted, or dismissed. I'd finally found a language Young Soon would understand. It just required dying to speak it. I'd seen Daehyun kill a man once, 3 years ago, in the basement of a warehouse in Incheon. The man had betrayed him, skimmed money, lied to his face. Daehyun had put a bullet between his eyes with the same expression he wore when reviewing quarterly reports. Efficient, emotionless, done. That's the man I'd married, the one who'd mastered the art of feeling nothing. So when I slumped forward, my chair scraping against marble as my body forgot how to hold itself upright, I expected that same cold efficiency. Call the doctor, handle the problem, move on. I didn't expect him to catch me. The floor of Sakura Palace's private dining room was heated marble, warm against my cheek as Daehyun lowered us both down. His arms, when was the last time these arms had held me, wrapped around me like I was something fragile, something that mattered. His hand cradled the back of my head, fingers tangling in my hair, and I felt him trembling. Park Daehyun did not tremble. Stay with me. His voice cracked on the last syllable, splintering into something raw and desperate. Naomi, stay with me. Look at me. I tried. God, I tried. But my vision was fragmenting, the chandelier above splitting into kaleidoscope patterns. His face swam in and out of focus, those dark eyes that hadn't really looked at me in years suddenly seeing everything. Too late. Always too late. What did you do? He wasn't asking. He was begging, pleading, as if I could still answer. Why would you? My throat convulsed, another wave of purple-stained saliva escaping despite my attempt to swallow it back. His expensive suit jacket, Tom Ford black, the one I'd picked up from the dry cleaner last Tuesday, was ruined now, purple spreading across the silk like a bruise. The wine. Young Soon's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and certain. It was meant for you, Daehyun. She drank your glass. The moment stretched. I watched the information hit him in real time. Watched his face transform from panic to confusion to something that looked almost like anguish. His hand tightened against my skull, and for the first time in 2,190 days, I saw him cry. Not much. Just a single tear that slid down his cheek and dropped onto mine, mixing with whatever was leaking from my own eyes. No. The word came out broken. No, Naomi, why? Why would you? He pressed his forehead to mine, and I could smell his cologne, feel his breath on my face. I need you. Do you hear me? I need you to fight this. The doctor is coming. You're going to be fine. You have to be fine. But we both knew better. The purple stain had spread from my lips to my chin, my throat was closing completely, and the warmth in my chest had become an inferno that was burning me from the inside out. I'd finally gotten him to notice me. I just had to die to do it. Young Soon Park had survived 43 years in the underworld by reading people. Every micro-expression, every hesitation, every lie, hidden behind practiced smiles. She'd built her reputation on seeing what others missed. Her husband used to joke that she could spot betrayal from 3 rooms away. She'd been so certain she'd spotted it in Naomi. But now, watching her son cradle his dying wife on the marble floor, Young Soon replayed the last 60 seconds and felt the ground shift beneath her designer heels. The way Naomi had looked at the wine. Not confused, not surprised. The way she'd paused that 5-second window where any person would have screamed war and knocked the glass away. The way she'd met Young Soon's eyes before she drank. That look. God, that look. It hadn't been fear or panic or even resignation. It had been something far more terrible. It had been peaceful, final, like a woman closing a book she'd been reading for too long. Naomi had known. She'd seen the poison, recognized it for what it was, and chosen it anyway. She's not breathing. Daehyun's voice shattered through Young Soon's realization. His hands were shaking as he tried to find a pulse, fingers pressed against Naomi's throat, where purple veins had begun to spiderweb beneath her brown skin. Mother, do something. You always know what to do. Tell me what to do. But Young Soon couldn't move. She was trapped in that moment of eye contact, Naomi's gaze burning into her memory. The woman she'd called a gold digger had just traded her life for Dae-hyun's. The outsider she'd accused of waiting for her son to die had died in his place. The American she'd insisted was only after power had rejected the ultimate power, survival, to prove a love that Young Soon had spent 6 years denying existed. The doctor burst through the door, his black bag already open, but Young Soon knew what he'd brought. Fine, she'd seen death enough times to recognize its signature, the purple staining Naomi's lips, the way her body had gone still in Daeun's arms, the terrible peace on her face. She knew. The words escaped Young Soon's mouth before she could stop them. She knew it was poisoned. Daeun's head snapped up, his face a mask of anguish and fury. What? The wine. She saw it. She knew. Young Soon's voice sounded strange to her own ears, hollow and distant. I watched her. She studied the glass, saw the color was wrong, and she drank it anyway. The silence that followed was louder than screaming. The doctor worked over Naomi's body, but everyone in the room understood the truth. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't confusion. This was a woman who'd made a choice, who'd looked at 6 years of accusations and found only one way to answer them. Young Soon had demanded proof of Naomi's loyalty. She'd questioned every gesture, every smile, every declaration of love. She'd told her son just last week that his wife was waiting for him to die so she could claim her inheritance. Now that proof lay dying on the floor, and it was written in purple and silence and sacrifice. Young Soon had finally gotten the evidence she'd demanded. She just had to watch her son's heart break to see it. Seoul National University Hospital's VIP wing existed in a state of perpetual hush. Thick carpeting absorbed footsteps. Walls were painted in calming neutrals. Even the air seemed muted, filtered through systems designed to remove any hint of the death that happened here regularly. 12 of Dae-hyun's guards lined the hallway outside the intensive care unit. Men who'd killed without hesitation, who'd broken bones and burned buildings, who feared nothing in this world. They stood in perfect military formation and said nothing. Their boss's wife was dying behind that door, and not one of them knew where to look. I became aware of the silence before I became aware of anything else. The machines that had been beeping, measuring my failing heart, my collapsing lungs, the poison racing through my bloodstream, went quiet. Not all at once. One by one, like lights going out in a house where no one lives anymore. Through the small window in the door I could see Dae-hyun. He'd refused to leave the room. Refused to sit. He stood beside my bed, holding my hand in both of his, and I watched him realize what the silence meant. Watched his face crumble in a way I'd never seen in 6 years of marriage. The doctor had explained it to him an hour ago. Aconite poisoning. Wolfsbane. There was no antidote, no reversal, no miracle, just a slow shutdown of every system that kept a body alive. My heart would stop last, struggling to pump blood that could no longer carry oxygen through veins that could no longer respond. Time of death, 11:47 p.m. The doctor's voice was professionally neutral, but I saw his hand shake as he made the notation. Everyone knew who Park Dae-hyun was, what he was capable of when angry, and his wife had just died on this man's watch. But Dae-hyun didn't move, didn't speak. He just kept holding my hand, staring at my face, like he was trying to memorize something he'd never bothered to learn while it mattered. Young Soon appeared in the doorway. She'd been in the waiting room, making calls, handling the logistics that death always requires. But now she stood frozen, watching her son hold a corpse, and for the first time since I'd known her, Young Soon looked old. The makeup couldn't hide it. The designer clothes couldn't dress it up. She looked like a woman who'd gotten exactly what she asked for and discovered it tasted like ashes. Dae-hyun, her voice was barely a whisper. You need to let her go. I can't. He was crying openly now, tears falling onto our joined hands. I never told her. She died thinking I didn't. I know. Young Soon stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the tile. I know what she died thinking, and that's on both of us. Outside in the hallway, the guards remained motionless. Silent sentries guarding a loss they couldn't prevent. The heart of the house had stopped beating, and they all felt it. The air had changed. The empire had shifted. Nothing would ever be the same. Dae-hyun found the journal 3 days after the funeral, tucked behind Naomi's shoes in the closet they'd shared, but never really occupied together. Black leather, worn at the edges from 6 years of confessions she'd never spoken aloud. He almost didn't open it. Some part of him knew that whatever was inside would be worse than watching her die. He opened it anyway. Year 1. He smiled at me today. Really smiled, not the public version. I'm gonna hold on to that for as long as I can. The entry was dated 2 months into their marriage. Dae-hyun remembered that day. They'd been in the kitchen, she'd made him coffee, and he'd been genuinely grateful. He'd smiled for 5 seconds. She'd built hope on 5 seconds. Year 2. Young-soon called me a gold digger again today. The funny thing is, I'd give back every diamond if it meant one real conversation with my husband, but you can't explain that to someone who's already decided you're lying. His hands shook as he turned pages. Entry after entry of a woman trying to convince herself she mattered. Documenting small moments, him asking about her day, him touching her shoulder in passing, him saying her name, like an archaeologist cataloging evidence of extinct affection. Year 3. I thought about leaving today. Packed a bag and everything. Made it to the door. But then I thought, what if tomorrow is the day he remembers why he married me? What if I leave one day too soon? Dae-hyun had been in Tokyo that week. He'd never known she'd almost left, never asked why she'd seemed different when he returned. Year 4. I've started talking to myself. Full conversations. It's pathetic, but at least someone in this house responds when I speak. The later entries got shorter, more desperate, less hopeful. Year 5. I don't recognize myself in the mirror anymore. I'm becoming the ornament they think I am. Beautiful, empty, expensive, useless. He'd given her emerald earrings for their 5th anniversary. She'd smiled and thanked him. He'd never noticed she never wore them. Year 6. Young-soon told me I'm waiting for him to die so I can have everything. She doesn't understand. I'd trade everything for 5 minutes of being seen. But that's not how this family works. They only believe in proof they can measure. Power. Money. Blood. The final entry was dated the morning of the dinner. The day she died. If you're reading this, it means you finally noticed me. I'm sorry it took something this permanent. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to just leave. I'm sorry I loved you more than I loved myself. But most of all, I'm sorry you'll never believe I loved you at all. Not unless I prove it the only way your world understands. This is my proof. I hope it's enough. Naomi Dae-hyun closed the journal and sat in their closet, surrounded by her dresses that still smelled like Chanel No. 5, and understood that his wife had spent 6 years slowly disappearing while he watched, and he'd done nothing, said nothing, felt nothing, until it was too late to feel anything but devastation. They buried Naomi on a Thursday in late autumn, when Seoul's sky matched the color of her coffin, custom mahogany with platinum handles, white roses, 3,000 of them filling the funeral hall until the air was thick with their cloying sweetness. Young-soon had spared no expense. Guilt, apparently, had a budget that rivaled love. The service was attended by everyone who mattered in Korea's shadow economy. Hundreds of people who'd never spoken to Naomi, never asked her name, never noticed her standing 3 steps behind her husband at galas and dinners. They came to pay respects to Park Dae-hyun's wife, not to the woman who'd loved peach cobbler and wanted to open an art gallery and died believing she was invisible. Dae-hyun stood at the front, accepting condolences with the same mechanical efficiency he'd used for everything else in their marriage. Bow. Thank you. Bow. Thank you. He looked the part of the grieving husband. Black suit, hollow eyes, the weight of loss evident in his posture. But inside, something more fundamental had broken. His phone buzzed constantly. Business that needed handling. Territories that required attention. Money that demanded movement. His empire was vast and hungry, and it didn't stop for death. 3 shipping deals needed his signature. A rival family in Busan was making moves. 2 judges needed paying. The machine of power kept grinding forward whether he cared or not. And for the first time in his adult life, Dae-hyun didn't care. He'd built this empire believing it meant something. That power was purpose. That control was security. That being feared was the same as being respected. He'd sacrificed everything for this throne, his humanity, his marriage, his wife's life, and now, standing in a room full of people who feared him but would never love him, he understood how worthless it all was. Naomi had died trying to prove she didn't want his power. The brutal irony was that her death had made him realize he didn't want it either. Not without her. Not anymore. Young Soon approached him after the service, her face carefully composed, but her eyes betraying the cracks in her armor. "The family needs you," she said quietly. "Business can't wait forever. Business can burn." His voice was flat, emotionless, the same tone he'd used when she was alive, the same tone that had killed her slowly, day by day, until she'd needed poison to finish the job. "Dae-hyun? She died thinking I didn't love her." He finally looked at his mother, and Young Soon took a step back from what she saw in his eyes. "She spent 6 years disappearing while we watched, while I worked, while you accused her of wanting what she was literally dying without. And now she's gone, and I have everything, the power, the empire, the throne." He looked around the funeral hall, at the flowers and the people and the expensive ceremony that meant nothing. "I'd trade it all for 5 more minutes. But that's not how this works, is it, Mother? We only believe in proof we can measure. And the price of that proof is sitting in a coffin, wearing a dress she'll never wear anywhere else." 6 months after Naomi's funeral, Dae-hyun sat in the same private dining room at Sakura Palace. Same mahogany walls, same crystal chandelier, same family members arranged around the table in their careful geometry of power. Everything was exactly the same except for the empty chair beside him. He'd tried moving it. Tried filling it with business associates, with potential allies, with anyone who might make the absence less obvious. But the chair remained stubbornly vacant in his mind, no matter who sat in it. He could still see her there, sitting 3 steps back from the conversation, smiling at appropriate moments, disappearing in plain sight. The empire was thriving. His businesses were expanding into new territories. Money flowed like water. His enemies feared him more than ever, especially after what he'd done to his cousin who'd orchestrated the poisoning. The man's body still hadn't been found, wouldn't be found. Dae-hyun had made sure of that. But none of it felt like victory. Young Soon sat across from him, older somehow despite only 6 months passing. She'd stopped making cutting observations, stopped orchestrating family politics with her usual precision. She attended dinners now with the energy of someone fulfilling a penance, going through motions that had lost their meaning. "The Busan deal closed," his uncle was saying. "Terms were favorable. You've solidified control of the southern ports." Dae-hyun nodded mechanically. Another territory, another victory. Another thing that Naomi would never know about. Not that she'd cared about territories when she was alive. She'd cared about peach cobbler and art galleries and 5 minutes of being seen. He'd given her none of those things. He'd given her jewelry and silence and loneliness, and when she'd traded her life for his, he'd finally understood what she'd been trying to tell him for 6 years. Power without connection was just organized loneliness. Empire without love was just expensive emptiness. The waiters brought wine. Dae-hyun stared at his glass, watching the red liquid catch the light. No purple shimmer, no metallic undertone, just wine. But his hand shook anyway, and he pushed the glass away untouched. He'd stopped drinking entirely. Couldn't look at wine without seeing her lift that glass. Couldn't smell Bordeaux without remembering purple stains on white linen. Couldn't enter a dining room without hearing the sound of her chair scraping against marble as she fell. "You need to move forward," Young Soon said quietly after the others had left. Just the 2 of them now, sitting with Naomi's ghost. "She wouldn't want you to. You have no idea what she would have wanted." His voice was ice. "Neither of us did. That was the problem." Young Soon looked down at her hands. "I was wrong about her. We were both wrong, and now she's dead and we're sitting here having another dinner without her, pretending this empire means something." He stood, the same way he'd stood for 6 years. Powerful, controlled, completely hollow. "The difference is, she's not sitting beside me being ignored. She's just gone. And I finally notice her. Isn't that hilarious?" He walked out, leaving Young Soon alone with the empty chairs and expensive wine and the ghost of a woman who'd proven her love the only way they'd understand. By dying for it.